Good morning students. In today's video lecture we are continuing with my sonnet that I had started in my previous class, and that was Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds by William Shakespeare. It is sonnet number 116, and I am just going to very briefly revise what I had done in yesterday's live lecture. And the first thing that I had told you was how we have divided this sonnet. It is not we, it is actually a norm to divide this Shakespearean sonnet. Why am I calling it a Shakespearean sonnet? Because it is written by William Shakespeare. And just to add something, now that we are talking about a Shakespearean sonnet, let me tell you something, and you may note this down, that sonnets are of two types. Firstly, Shakespearean sonnet and Petrarchan or Italian sonnet. And when the Petrarchan sonnet or the Italian sonnet was developed by Petrarch, and then Shakespeare actually picked it up and he gave a new version to the Petrarchan sonnet, and he used it to a great extent because he had written more than 150 sonnets, and there is a difference of structure in both the sonnets. The Petrarchan sonnet is a combination of 8 plus 6, and a Shakespearean sonnet is a combination of 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 2. So this also makes 14 lines, and of course this also makes 14 lines. The 8-line stanza is called an octave, and the 6-line stanza is called a sestet. Here the 4-line stanzas are called quatrains, and one couplet. Yesterday also I had told you how there are 3 quatrains which make 12 lines and one couplet which makes 2 lines. So 12 plus 2 is 14, and this becomes our typical Shakespearean sonnet. So Shakespeare, he is a writer which everybody knows about. Shakespeare wrote in the Elizabethan age. Let me write this down. The Elizabethan age, it is also called the Renaissance period of English literature. And in terms of the country England where Shakespeare lived, it was the golden age of literature and science and development, because Queen Elizabeth I, in whose reign Shakespeare was writing, she was a very fair and a secular queen, and she was a patron of the sciences, of the arts, and of literature, and she was herself a very learned lady. And in the time England was at its peak, it was the golden period, and development was all around. Shakespeare's sonnets are sonnets of positivity, of love, of friendship, and a number of themes, but they are all themes which are positive. And you will obviously agree with me if I say that when situations around you are good and positive, if your country is flourishing, if there is happiness and prosperity around you, then even a writer writes on positive themes. And that is what happened with Shakespeare. Shakespeare was writing at the time when he himself was very successful, when the country in which he lived was also flourishing and prospering. So obviously the themes that he touches upon are themes of love and friendship quite a lot. And this sonnet also, which here you can see in front of you, it is a sonnet which has the theme of true love. True love, which could be a love between a man and a woman, a boy and a girl, between two friends. And he does not name anybody in this sonnet, but definitely he gives us the characteristics. You can say the do's and don'ts, what should be and what should not be of love. So he almost gives us a definition of true love in this sonnet. What is typical of Shakespeare and which also relates to the theme of the sonnet is that he talks of love which is not bound by time. And you must remember this thing, that in this poem, when we will read this and you will understand what the poet is writing in the lines of the poem, you will also understand that he is not just talking of earthly love. It is like a spiritual and divine love. Okay, spiritual and divine, I am sure you understand. Spiritual and divine means something which is not related to the life of the earth, which is not related to the body or to man's existence. It is beyond man's existence. It is like something which is almost goes deep down to the soul. So he talks of spiritual and divine love which is not bound by time, because if he was talking of earthly love, it would be bound by time, it would reduce, it would decrease with time, and ultimately when man dies, the love also dies. But here in this poem, he talks of the kind of love which would never die and which is not bound by time, which means that time has no effect on the quality of true love. So these are some of the things that he talks about. But first of all, when we begin this poem and we have done the structure of the poem, as here you can see, all of this is called the structure of the poem, where we talk of what are the division of lines, what is the rhyme scheme, and things like that. After doing the structure of the poem, we must also talk of, and this is again important and I wish you would note it down, the title of the poem. And here in the title, the poet has used the term marriage of true minds, and here it is a metaphor. Right in the beginning, right in the title of the poem, the poet uses a metaphor. But before I tell you what the metaphor is, I must also explain the meaning of the term metaphor. Those of you who have done poetry in their class 10th and 12th, of course you have done that. Your teachers must have explained to you different kinds of poetic devices. Let me write this down. Poetic devices. What are poetic devices? Poetic devices are ways that a poet uses to make his poem interesting, to add meaning to the poem. He uses different poetic devices so that he can, make his poem very rich in meaning. Because you would agree that this is a very short poem. And of course, a poem would always be shorter than, say, a novel. So what a an author of a novel can write in maybe 20 pages, a poet would only have to write the same emotion and put the same meaning in 2 lines. So how could 20 pages be equal to, say, 2 lines? It has to be so rich that every word should have very deep meaning. And the poet, and in addition to that, the poet uses poetic devices which adds richness to his work, which makes the poem so beautiful, aesthetic and pleasing. So poetic devices, so metaphor is one of the poetic devices. It is used for the purpose of comparison. Comparison in Hindi it would mean तुलना करना, दो चीज़ों के आपस में तुलना करना. तो for comparison usually there are 2 poetic devices which are used. One is the simile and the other is the metaphor, and both of these are very important when you are doing poetry. So before I begin, I must give you explanation and difference of simile and metaphor. Here simile. It is a device of comparison, and typically the poet uses such words as like, it is like an indirect comparison. For example, she is as beautiful as a rose. Here she is being compared to a rose. It is a comparison, and the poet uses the terms as for comparison. So what would we say? The poet has used the poetic device simile. Similarly, I wish to give you an example of the metaphor also. It is a device where no such terms are used. So the poet does not use words like as or like. He does not use them. It is like a direct comparison. So for example, if we modify this sentence only, the poet would say, she is a rose. Here again the comparison is between she and rose, but it is a direct comparison. The poet does not say like, he just says she is. Okay, and this is a poetic device called the metaphor. So when the poet says marriage of true minds, it is a metaphor for true love. So it is not about the earthly existence, it is not about the body, it is about the soul. So true love is a marriage of the mind or the soul. Here for mind you can also use the word soul. So as I told you before that that Shakespeare in this poem talks of true love, that is like the union of the soul. It is spiritual, it is divine, it is not related to the body. So this is the most important thing that you must understand about the poem, and this of course also makes the theme of the poem. I hope you have understood this much, and this is important regarding the title of the poem. In my next video, I am going to begin with the first quatrain, which also contains the theme of the poem and which is very important. But I think this is enough for now. Thank you very much.